You know that feeling when your life can change completely in a matter of seconds, when a single decision can define not just your destiny, but that of hundreds of people. I lived through that on a night I'll never forget, flying over the dark waters of the South Atlantic. When I became more than just a pilot, I became someone who had to choose between protecting many or saving just one. This story is based on real events. All names have been changed to protect the privacy of those involved. Special thanks to aviation professionals who share their experiences to make the skies safer. My name is Ryan, and that Tuesday in September, I was commanding a Boeing 737-800 on a night route between São Paulo and Buenos Aires. It was my 15th year as a captain, and I thought I'd seen everything commercial aviation could throw at me. Boy, was I wrong. I remember perfectly how the day had started. I arrived at the airport 2 hours before the flight, as I always do. I reviewed the weather documentation, flight plan, aircraft weight and balance, everything normal, everything within parameters. The weather forecast showed some scattered clouds over the ocean, nothing out of the ordinary for that time of year. During the pre-flight inspection, I walked around the aircraft, checking every detail: tires, brakes, control surfaces, navigation lights. It was a ritual I'd performed religiously for 15 years, but that night I paid special attention to the onboard medical emergency systems. I don't know why, but something told me to double-check that all equipment was working perfectly. The flight had departed on time at 9:30 p.m., with 180 passengers aboard and an experienced crew. My co-pilot was Jake, a competent young man I'd flown with several times. At 28 years old, he had that rare combination of youthful enthusiasm with mature responsibility that I so admired in younger pilots. Flight attendants Sarah, Ashley and Jessica completed our team, all with more than 5 years of experience on international flights. During the first 30 minutes of flight, everything went perfectly. Passengers were relaxed, many already sleeping. It was one of those quiet night flights that makes any experienced pilot think that routine can be a good thing. The entertainment system was working normally, the meal service had been completed without problems, and even the baby who had cried during takeoff had already calmed down. "Captain, what a beautiful night," Jake commented, watching the lights of the Brazilian coast fade through his side window. "Calm sea, clear sky, almost full moon. Nights like this remind me why I chose to be a pilot." I smiled, remembering myself 20 years ago when I was still a co-pilot. "Enjoy it, Jake. In our profession, quiet nights are a gift we should savor." Little did I know how prophetic those words would sound a few hours later. The first sign that something was wrong came when we were about 200 miles off the Brazilian coast, flying at 37,000 feet. The sky began to darken more than normal for that time of year, and our weather radar showed a cold front approaching faster than we had anticipated. The clouds ahead of us began to take on a yellowish coloration on the radar, indicating possible storm formation. "Jake, are you seeing this on the radar?" I asked, pointing to the formations developing ahead of us. "Yes, Captain. Looks like that cold front that was forecast to pass through the region tomorrow morning decided to pick up the pace." I consulted our weather data again. The original forecast showed stable conditions all the way to Buenos Aires, but clearly nature had other plans for us that night. "Let's request an altitude change to 39,000 feet, I said, while observing the cumulonimbus formations developing ahead of us. "And request an alternate route through Sector Charlie. I don't want to fly through that formation." Jake made the necessary contacts with air traffic control while I adjusted our route in the navigation system. It was a routine maneuver. Weather deviations are part of any commercial pilot's daily routine. Nothing to worry about excessively. That's when we heard the cabin emergency chime. Once, twice, 3 times. The code that means captain to cabin, urgent. In 15 years flying as captain, I'd heard that chime maybe 10 times. In most cases, they were minor medical situations. Passengers feeling unwell, anxiety attacks, small injuries. Never anything that couldn't be resolved with standard onboard medical resources and, when necessary, radio medical guidance. Sarah appeared in the cockpit with her face paler than I'd ever seen it. She, who always maintained calm in any situation, who I'd seen deal with aggressive passengers, severe turbulence and even attempted door-opening attempts in flight, was clearly shaken. "Captain, We have a serious medical emergency. It's a child. Appears to be cardiac arrest. I felt my stomach freeze. In 15 years of career, I'd dealt with some medical emergencies. Passengers with heart attacks, epileptic seizures, premature births, fainting spells. But never with a child in critical condition. And never over the ocean, far from any nearby airport. "Is there a doctor on board?" I asked, already imagining the answer wouldn't be what I wanted to hear. "We have a nurse and a third-year medical student. They're already attending to her, but the situation is critical, Captain. The child, she's in really bad shape." Sarah's voice trembled slightly, and that told me everything I needed to know about the severity of the situation. "Jake, take command. Maintain our current altitude and route. I'm going to assess the situation in the cabin." I left Jake in command and rushed to the cabin. What I saw marked me forever. In the center aisle near the middle rows was a little girl no more than 3 years old, completely unconscious in the arms of a woman crying desperately. Beside her, an equally desperate man, clearly the child's parents, held his wife's hand and whispered words of comfort that sounded more like a prayer. The nurse, a woman of about 50 named Grace, was performing cardiopulmonary resuscitation maneuvers, while the medical student, Michael, tried to keep the airways clear with the limited resources we had aboard. Other passengers formed a respectful circle around the scene, some praying silently, others offering help in any way possible. What impressed me most in that moment was the absolute silence in the cabin. 180 people, and you could only hear the sounds of medical equipment and the whispered instructions between Grace and Michael. It was as if everyone instinctively understood the gravity of the situation. "How is she?" I asked quietly to Grace, kneeling beside her. "Captain, the situation is very critical. She had a very strong seizure about 10 minutes ago and went into cardiac arrest shortly after. We managed to reverse it once with resuscitation maneuvers, but she arrested again 2 minutes ago. We're managing to maintain some heart rhythm, but it's unstable. She needs a hospital with a pediatric ICU, and she needs it fast." Grace spoke with the authority of someone who clearly had experience. I later learned she was an ICU nurse at a major hospital in Chicago for more than 20 years, returning from vacation in Buenos Aires when the emergency happened. Michael, the student, looked up at me with an expression that mixed determination and fear. "Captain, we're doing everything we can, but our resources are very limited here. We don't have adequate pediatric medications. We don't have advanced monitoring equipment. Every minute that passes..." He didn't need to complete the sentence. I understood. I rushed back to the cockpit, my mind working a mile a minute. I consulted our navigation system. We were exactly halfway between São Paulo and Buenos Aires over the ocean. The nearest airport was Montevideo, Uruguay, approximately 180 nautical miles away. Under normal conditions, it would be about 25 minutes of flight time, but conditions weren't normal. The approaching storm already covered much of the Uruguayan coast, with winds up to 45 knots, reduced visibility, and severe turbulence. Worse yet, I had just received a message from control informing that Montevideo Airport had been temporarily closed due to adverse weather conditions. "Jake, I need you to contact Buenos Aires and Montevideo Control. We have a serious medical emergency and need immediate landing options." While Jake made the contacts, I analyzed our alternatives with the technical coldness that 15 years of experience had taught me, but with my heart racing thinking about that child back there. Option 1. Attempt a landing in Montevideo even with the airport closed. They would open an exception for medical emergency, I was sure. But it would mean flying through a severe storm with 180 passengers aboard, with crosswinds near the aircraft's operational limits. The risks were enormous, not just for Emma, but for everyone aboard. Option 2. Continue to Buenos Aires, which was about 40 minutes of flight time away, with weather conditions still favorable. The landing would be safe, without risks to other passengers. But 40 minutes can be an eternity when a life is hanging by a thread, especially the life of a 3-year-old. Option 3. Return to São Paulo. But that would mean more than an hour of additional flight time, absolutely unfeasible given the child's condition. "Captain," Jake interrupted my thoughts. "Montevideo Control confirms the airport is closed, but they're opening an exception for our medical emergency. Current conditions. Wind, 280 degrees, 42 knots gusting to 48 knots. Visibility 800 meters. Heavy rain, cloud ceiling at 300 feet. They're asking if we confirm we want to proceed. Sarah returned to the cockpit at that moment. Captain, they managed to reverse the arrest again, but the nurse says the vital signs are very unstable. She doesn't know how much longer we can maintain her. The parents are, well, you can imagine how they are. If you guys think you've experienced difficult moments in your lives, imagine having 180 lives in your hands and having to decide between risking all of them to try to save one. If you're enjoying this story and want to hear more real reports from the skies, subscribe to Kaisha Preta. We have new episodes every week. I asked Jake to take command temporarily and return to the cabin. I needed to see the situation with my own eyes before making the final decision. The scene was heartbreaking. The little girl, I later learned her name was Emma, was unconscious, her angelic little face pale as paper. Her small hands were cold, and her breathing was almost imperceptible. Grace and Michael worked tirelessly, doing everything they could with the limited resources of a commercial aircraft. I saw that other passengers had offered to help. A lady had given up her blouse to make compresses. A gentleman was holding the improvised IV bag. A young woman was timing the chest compressions. It was impressive to see how an emergency situation can reveal the best in people. Nobody complained about the delay. Nobody questioned what was happening. Everyone understood that something very serious was at stake. I knelt beside the child's parents. The father, a man of about 30 with clothes suggesting he was returning from a business trip, held his wife's hand, who wouldn't stop crying. She murmured her daughter's name repeatedly, as if she could bring her back just with the power of a mother's voice. "Captain," he said with a broken voice but maintaining touching dignity in the face of the situation, "please do whatever it takes. She's our only daughter. We had 2 other children who didn't survive. Emma is all we have." Those words hit me like a punch to the stomach. This wasn't just a sick child. This was the only surviving daughter of parents who had already lost 2 children. The responsibility I felt in that moment was indescribable. In that instant, looking at those desperate parents and that defenseless child, there were no longer 180 passengers. There was no longer a storm. There were no longer calculated risks. There was only Emma, a little girl who desperately needed a hospital, and parents who had already suffered too many losses in life. "Grace," I said quietly, "be brutally honest with me. How much time does she have?" The nurse looked me directly in the eyes. "Captain, under normal conditions, I'd say she needs to be in a pediatric ICU within 20 minutes maximum, but these aren't normal conditions. We're performing miracles here with what we have. Michael is doing better than many licensed doctors I know. If we can keep her stable, maybe she can hold on a little longer. But every minute that passes, her chances diminish." I returned to the cockpit and picked up the microphone. It was time to make the most difficult decision of my career. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Ryan. We have a serious medical emergency aboard involving a child, and we're changing our destination to Montevideo, Uruguay. Due to adverse weather conditions in the region, the landing may be significantly turbulent. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts securely fastened and follow all crew instructions. Our improvised medical team is doing exceptional work, and we'll do everything in our power to reach the hospital as quickly as possible. I appreciate everyone's understanding and patience." I never heard an aircraft as silent as in that moment after my announcement. 180 people who understood instinctively that we were all together in a situation that was bigger than any of us individually. It was as if the entire cabin had united in a silent prayer for little Emma. I contacted Montevideo Control, Montevideo Tower. "This is flight with medical emergency, 3-year-old child in recurrent cardiac arrest, requesting immediate landing even with adverse weather conditions. We have 180 people on board. Flight, we copy your medical emergency. Current conditions at airport. Wind 280 degrees, 42 knots gusting to 48 knots. Visibility 800 meters in heavy rain. Cloud ceiling 300 feet. Wet runway. Do you confirm you wish to proceed with these conditions?" I took a deep breath. These were conditions at the limit of what was operational, close to the airport's weather minimums. Crosswinds of nearly 50 knots would require perfect landing technique. Reduced visibility would make the approach extremely challenging, but it was our only chance. Affirmative, Tower. We declare medical emergency, request fire trucks, ambulance, and pediatric medical team on standby. ETA approximately 23 minutes. Copied, flight. Fire trucks and ambulance already alerted. Medical team from hospital will be dispatched directly to airport. You'll have absolute priority for landing on runways 06. Good luck. We began descent toward Montevideo while the storm intensified around us. From 20,000 feet, we could already see the first lightning cutting across the sky ahead of us. The weather radar showed severe thunderstorm cells directly over the airport. Jake, I'm going to configure the aircraft for landing in adverse conditions. We'll use flaps in configuration 40 for better control at low speed, and I'll maintain a speed slightly above normal to compensate for crosswinds. Understood, Captain. Landing systems verified, emergency lights on standby, brakes and reversers tested. At 15,000 feet, turbulence began to get severe. The plane rocked frighteningly, climbing and descending hundreds of feet in seconds. Through internal communication, Sarah informed me they could keep Emma stable, but it was getting increasingly difficult with the aircraft moving so much. "Captain," came Grace's voice through the cabin interphone, "it's very difficult to maintain resuscitation maneuvers with this turbulence. Does it need to be more stable?" "Grace, unfortunately, it's going to get worse before it gets better. We're descending through the storm and turbulence is unavoidable. Can you hold on a few more minutes?" "We'll manage, Captain, but please as fast as possible." At 10,000 feet, I had to request a direct descent to avoid the most intense cells of the storm. Control authorized us a non-standard approach, steeper than normal, to minimize time exposed to adverse conditions. "Jake, I'm taking manual control for landing. Monitor our instruments and alert me to any abnormalities. If I yell 'go around,' immediately apply maximum power. Understood?" "Understood, Captain. All systems monitored." At 5,000 feet, we could already see lightning cutting across the sky around us with frightening intensity. Rain pounded the windshield with such force that the wiper system could barely keep up. Our navigation instruments worked at their limits, fighting against electrical interference from the storm and violent crosswinds. "Tower, 12 miles to runway, beginning final ILS approach. Flight wind now 290 degrees, 45 knots gusting to 52 knots. Visibility dropped to 600 meters. Stay alert. We had another aircraft that attempted landing 15 minutes ago and had to go around 3 times. That information wasn't exactly encouraging, but there was no turning back. Emma couldn't wait for better conditions. What happened in the next 8 minutes was, without doubt, the most challenging landing of my career. With crosswinds of more than 50 knots, I needed to keep the aircraft aligned with the runway, using a precise combination of aileron and rudder that demanded all my experience and skill. With each gust of wind, the aircraft was pushed laterally, forcing me to make constant and aggressive corrections. "Localizer captured," I announced, referring to the radio signal that would guide us to the runway. "Glide slope captured," Jake confirmed a few seconds later, but the navigation instruments oscillated violently due to storm interference. I needed to trust both the instruments and flight feel, balancing both to maintain our approach path. At 1,000 feet altitude, a particularly strong gust pushed us 40 degrees to the right of the runway centerline. I applied left aileron and right rudder simultaneously in a maneuver called crab angle that allows maintaining correct trajectory even with intense lateral wind. "Captain, drift angle 25 degrees, Jake reported, monitoring our position relative to the runway. At 500 feet altitude, another violent gust threw us 30 degrees to the right. For a moment I thought we'd have to go around. The angle was at the limit of what I could correct. But I thought of Emma back there, fighting for her life, and found strength and technique to continue. "Decision height," Jake shouted over the noise of rain and winds, following standard procedure. "Continuing," I replied with all the determination I could muster. At 200 feet, I managed to align the aircraft with the runway through a series of quick and precise corrections. At 100 feet, the wind shifted slightly, giving me a small window of stability. 50 feet, Jake announced. 30 feet, he continued. At the last moment, Exactly like in the crosswind training I practice regularly, I managed to completely align the aircraft with the runway center line. The touchdown was firmer than I would have liked, about 400 FPM instead of the ideal 200 FPM, but we were on solid ground. I immediately applied brakes firmly while thrust reversers roared to help with braking on the wet runway. The anti-skid brake control worked perfectly, preventing the wheels from locking on the slippery surface. Tower, on ground at 11:47 p.m., requesting taxi direct to medical emergency position. Copied, flight. Excellent landing in those conditions. Medical team already in position. Follow the yellow lights to position. Before we even reached the terminal, we could already see the lights of the ambulance, fire department and mobile ICU waiting for us. The efficiency of the Uruguayan emergency team was impressive. We barely stopped, and they were already positioned to board. As soon as I shut down the engines, I ran down to the cabin. The scene I found moved me deeply. Emma was being carefully carried by Uruguayan paramedics, still unconscious, but with vital signs apparently more stable than before. The parents walked alongside the stretcher, the father holding his daughter's small hand, the mother talking with the medical team in Spanish, broken by tears. Grace came to me with tears in her eyes. "Captain, it was close. In the last minutes before landing, she had 2 more arrests. If we had arrived 5 minutes later, without your landing, she wouldn't have had any chance. You saved her life." Michael, the medical student, was clearly moved by the experience, but also transformed by it. "Captain, thank you for trusting us. I never thought I'd apply my theoretical knowledge in such a critical, real situation. It was intense. But I knew it hadn't been just me. It had been that entire crew working as a perfect team. It had been Michael, a brave student who put his theoretical knowledge into practice when it mattered most. It had been Grace, who used all her ICU experience to keep Emma alive during those critical moments. It had been Sarah, Ashley, and Jessica, who coordinated the entire operation in the cabin with exceptional professionalism. And it had been each of the 180 passengers who understood the gravity of the situation and supported us with their patience, understanding, and even prayers. Many offered to help in some way. Others maintained respectful silence throughout the process. Some told me later they prayed during the entire landing. If you're following this story and getting emotional about this example of teamwork and human solidarity, don't forget to subscribe to the Caixa Preta channel. We have dozens of other real stories that show the best of aviation and the people who make the skies safer. 3 days later, I received a call that moved me to tears. It was Emma's father. "Captain Ryan, this is David, Emma's dad. I wanted to thank you from the bottom of my heart. She's okay. She woke up and is playing in the hospital. The doctors said she had viral encephalitis that caused the seizures and cardiac arrest. With proper treatment, she's going to recover completely. But they also said a few more minutes of delay and, well, I don't want to even think about it. Thank you for risking to save our daughter. Thank you for bringing hope back to our family." His voice was choked up, and I had to pause before I could respond. "David, any father would do the same. She's a fighter, your daughter, and you and your wife are very brave people. Captain, can I tell you something? Emma is already talking about the pilot uncle who helped her. She doesn't remember much, but she remembers gentle voices talking to her during the flight. I think somehow she knew she was being taken care of." I learned later that Emma had suffered viral encephalitis, a brain inflammation caused by a virus that triggered severe febrile seizures that evolved into cardiac arrest. It's a serious but treatable condition when diagnosed quickly, with proper treatment at Montevideo Hospital, including antiviral medication and intensive support. She recovered completely in 2 weeks. Today, 8 years later, she's a healthy girl, full of energy, and with an inexplicable passion for airplanes. Her parents send me photos of her from time to time, always smiling, always full of life. In the last photo I received, she was wearing a pilot uniform at a school Halloween party. That night taught me that sometimes heroism isn't about doing something extraordinary or spectacular. It's about doing the right thing when all options are difficult. It's about using your experience, your team, your technique, and, yes, taking calculated risks when a life is at stake. It's about remembering that behind every passenger, there's a family, a story, dreams, and people who love them. In the months following the incident, I received several messages from passengers who were on that flight. Many said it was one of the most memorable experiences of their lives, not because of the turbulence or fear of landing in adverse conditions, but for having been part of something bigger, for having seen how complete strangers can unite in a moment of crisis, how compassion can overcome fear, how each person can contribute to saving a life. A lady wrote to me, "Captain, I was returning from Buenos Aires after visiting my daughter. I'm afraid of flying, I always get nervous. But that night, seeing all of us united to help that family, I completely forgot my fear. I learned that sometimes our small worries disappear when we remember what really matters in life." A businessman who was on the flight said, "That night changed my perspective on many things. I was returning from a frustrated business meeting, mentally complaining about contracts that didn't close. But seeing those desperate parents, remembering my own daughter at home, I realized how much I was focusing on the wrong things. Now I prioritize more time with family." Grace and I became close friends after that night. She told me she continued flying as a volunteer nurse on international flights whenever possible, always carrying a more complete medical kit than the standard required. "That night reminded me why I chose to be a nurse," she said. "Sometimes life puts us exactly where we need to be at the right moment." And Michael? Well, Michael graduated from medical school 2 years later, and today is a pediatrician specializing in pediatric emergencies at one of Chicago's major hospitals. He told me that night defined not only his medical specialty, but his life philosophy. "Captain, I learned that knowledge without courage is worthless, and that sometimes the scariest situation of our life can also be the most transformative." Jake was promoted to captain the following year. On his first flight as pilot in command, he sent me a message I keep to this day. "Captain Ryan, I learned from the best that heroism isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what needs to be done even when afraid. It's about remembering that our responsibility goes far beyond technical procedures. It's about caring for the people who trust us." If this story is touching you in some way, if it's making you reflect on courage, compassion, or how each of us can make a difference, subscribe to the Caixa Preta channel and hit the notification bell. We have dozens of other real stories that show how aviation can teach us about teamwork, overcoming challenges, and the best of human nature. But the most important lesson I learned that stormy night over the South Atlantic is that all of us are capable of heroism when the situation demands it. It doesn't have to be in an aircraft cockpit at 37,000 feet or in an operating room. It can be at your job, helping a colleague in difficulty. It can be in your family, being present when someone needs you. It can be in your community, offering help to a stranger. Heroism is recognizing when someone needs you and deciding to act, even when it's difficult, even when there are risks, even when you're afraid. Emma is 8 years old today, and according to her parents, wants to be a children's doctor when she grows up, as she says. She wants to help people like Aunt Grace and Uncle Michael helped her. I don't know if she consciously remembers that night. She was very young, but somehow that experience planted a seed in her heart, a deep understanding about compassion and helping others. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had made a different choice that night. If I had decided to continue to Buenos Aires, prioritizing the statistical safety of the 180 passengers over Emma's life. From a risk management standpoint, maybe it would have been the most logically defensible decision. But not from a human standpoint. Not from the standpoint of a father who looked at that child and saw his own daughter. Aviation taught me many things over the years. Technical precision, operational discipline, efficient teamwork, decision-making under extreme pressure. But that night, it taught me something that goes far beyond operation manuals. It taught me about compassion in action, about taking on responsibilities that go beyond the job description, about what it really means to care for people who trust you. Today, whenever I face a difficult decision, whether flying or on the ground, whether professional or personal, I remember Emma's little face and ask myself, if it were my daughter, what would I do? And invariably, that question guides me to the right path, even when it's the most difficult path. Because at the end of the day, heroism isn't about being perfect or never being afraid. It's about doing what needs to be done, especially when nobody's watching, especially when it's difficult. especially when something more important than our own convenience or personal safety is at stake. And if you made it this far in this story, if you followed every moment of this emotional journey with us, I'm sure you also have that heroism within you. You might not have discovered it yet. You might not have had the opportunity to demonstrate it. But when life puts you in a situation where someone needs you, and it will, remember this story. Remember that each of us has the power to make a difference in someone's life. Never underestimate the impact your actions can have. That night, I didn't just save Emma. The entire experience changed the lives of many people aboard that aircraft. Grace became an even more dedicated nurse. Michael chose his medical specialty. Jake became a more human and caring captain. Passengers rethought their life priorities. And the effects continued spreading like ripples in water. Grace trained dozens of other healthcare professionals in aeromedical emergencies. Michael has already saved countless children in his career as an emergency pediatrician. Jake, now captain, has faced his own emergency situations with the wisdom he gained that night. The passengers returned home with a renewed perspective on what really matters in life. A small action, the decision to risk a landing in adverse conditions to save a life, created waves of positivity that spread far beyond what any of us could imagine at that moment. That's why, don't forget to subscribe to Keisha Preta if you want to continue hearing stories that show the best and bravest of human nature. Real stories of ordinary people who did extraordinary things when the situation demanded it. We have new episodes every week, always with stories from those who live the skies up close and learned that flying is much more than simply transporting people from one place to another. If you had to make the same decision I made that night, what would you do? It's a question that has no easy answer, no mathematical formula, no standard procedure in the manual. Sometimes life's most important situations don't have a technically right or wrong answer. They only have the answer we can live with in peace after it's made. And I can sleep peacefully every night knowing that on that stormy night over the South Atlantic, when life put me before the choice between the safety of many and the life of one, I chose life. I chose hope. I chose to believe that it's worth risking when what's at stake is more important than our own fears. Emma is growing up strong and healthy, full of dreams and possibilities. Her parents send me regular updates, always thanking, always remembering that night that changed their lives. And I always respond the same thing: don't thank me. Thank life for putting all the right people in the right place at the right time. Thank human compassion that made dozens of strangers unite to save a life. Thank the love that moves the world and reminds us always of what really matters.